The Forbidden City in the spring of 1642 was a world unto itself, where beauty and cruelty danced together like lovers in an eternal embrace. Mei Lin walked through the courtyard of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, her silk slippers making no sound on the polished stones, her presence as ethereal as morning mist over the palace gardens. At 19, she had been imperial consort of the third rank for 2 years, a position that placed her above hundreds of other women, but still far from the emperor's true affections. Her beauty was legendary throughout the palace, skin like porcelain, eyes that held the depth of mountain lakes, and hair so black it seemed to absorb light itself. Yet beauty alone was insufficient currency in the treacherous economy of imperial favor. Emperor Chongzhen ruled the Ming Dynasty during its dying days, though none dared speak such words aloud. The empire crumbled at its borders while rebellion festered in its heart. But within the Forbidden City, the ancient rituals of power continued with desperate magnificence. The emperor, barely 30, but aged beyond his years by the weight of a failing realm, sought comfort in the arms of women who could help him forget the reports of military disasters and peasant uprisings. Mei Lin had caught his attention with her intelligence as much as her beauty. Unlike other concubines who spoke only of poetry and flowers, she had dared to discuss matters of state, offering insights that revealed a mind sharp enough to comprehend the empire's predicament. For a time, this had elevated her above her peers, earning her the emperor's ear and occasionally his bed. But intelligence in a concubine was a double-edged sword. The same qualities that attracted the emperor's interest also threatened those who preferred their counsel to flow through more traditional channels. Mei Lin had made enemies among the palace eunuchs and the emperor's senior advisors, men who viewed her growing influence as a challenge to their own carefully cultivated power. This morning, she sensed that the delicate balance which had protected her was about to shift. The palace hummed with whispers of conspiracy, and the servants who once sought her favor now avoided her gaze. In the Forbidden City, such signs were as ominous as storm clouds gathering on a summer horizon. Chapter 2. The Accusation. The summons came at dawn, delivered by Chief Eunuch Wang Cheng'en, whose presence in any concubine's chambers was never a harbinger of good fortune. Mei Lin received him in her sitting room, surrounded by the treasures that marked her status: jade figurines, silk scrolls, and golden ornaments that caught the early morning light streaming through latticed windows. His Imperial Majesty requires your immediate presence in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, Wang announced, his voice carrying the flat authority of one who had delivered similar messages countless times before. You are to come at once, without adornment. The instruction to appear without jewelry was particularly ominous. In the imperial court, a woman's ornaments were not merely decoration, but symbols of her rank and protection. To be stripped of them was the first step toward being stripped of everything else. Mei Lin bowed deeply, her training allowing her to maintain perfect composure despite the ice forming in her veins. This humble servant obeys His Imperial Majesty's command. The walk through the palace corridors felt like a journey to her own execution. Guards flanked her path, their presence unnecessary for escort but effective for intimidation. Other concubines and servants turned away as she passed, their averted gazes confirming that word of her impending disgrace had already spread through the palace's invisible network of gossip. The Hall of Supreme Harmony loomed before her, its golden roof tiles blazing in the morning sun like the scales of a dragon. This was where the emperor held court for matters of highest importance, where imperial justice was dispensed with ceremonial grandeur. Mei Lin had never been summoned here before. Concubines were creatures of the inner palace, rarely permitted to witness the formal exercise of imperial power. Emperor Chongzhen sat upon the dragon throne, his yellow robes pooling around him like liquid gold, the imperial crown casting shadows across features that had grown gaunt with worry and sleepless nights. Beside him stood his most trusted advisors, Grand Secretary Zhou Yanru, whose ambition was matched only by his cunning, General Wu Sangui, the military commander who held the empire's northern borders, and Minister Liu Zhongzhou, the moral philosopher whose rigid principles masked his own hunger for influence. As Mei Lin prostrated herself before the throne, she could feel the weight of their combined gaze, each man calculating how her downfall might serve his own purposes. Mei Lin of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, the emperor's voice echoed through the vast hall, formal and distant. You stand accused of treasonous correspondence with enemies of the state. Chapter 3. The Web of Lies. The evidence presented against Mei Lin was a masterpiece of fabrication, constructed with the skill of artisans who had spent lifetimes perfecting the delicate art of political destruction. Letters bearing her seal spoke of military movements and imperial weaknesses, information that only someone with access to the highest levels of government could possess. These documents were discovered in the quarters of a captured rebel spy, Grand Secretary Zhou announced, his voice carrying the righteous indignation of a man exposing treason. They detailed troop positions, supply routes, and the Emperor's personal schedule, intelligence that could only have come from within the Forbidden City itself. Mei Lin listened to the accusations with growing understanding of how completely she had been outmaneuvered. The letters were clever forgeries, incorporating enough genuine information to appear authentic while adding the treasonous elements that would justify her destruction. Her seal could have been replicated by any skilled craftsman, and her handwriting mimicked by palace scribes who had seen her correspondent. This humble servant protests her innocence, her voice clear despite the enormity of these letters are not of my making, and the sentiments they express are foreign to my heart, which beats only with loyalty to His Imperial Majesty. Minister Liu stepped forward, his expression grave with moral authority. The evidence speaks for itself. Even if you did not write these letters personally, they bear your seal and represent information you had access to. As a woman of the inner palace, your duty was to guard such knowledge as jealously as you guarded your virtue. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. Even if Mei Lin could prove she hadn't written the letters, which would be nearly impossible given the quality of the forgery, she could still be held responsible for the breach of security they represented. In the paranoid atmosphere of a dying dynasty, proximity to guilt was often indistinguishable from guilt itself. Emperor Chongzhen studied her with eyes that revealed nothing of his inner thoughts. Once, those same eyes had looked upon her with warmth and desire, but now they held only the cold calculation of a ruler weighing the political necessity of sacrifice. "Have you anything to say in your defense?" he asked, offering what might be her final opportunity to speak. Mei Lin raised her head, meeting his gaze directly for what she sensed would be the last time. "Your Majesty, I have served you faithfully and would gladly die in your service. If my death is required for the good of the Empire, I accept it. But I beg you to remember that those who destroy innocence in the name of security may find they have weakened the very thing they sought to protect." Her words carried a subtle warning that was not lost on the assembled officials. In their eagerness to eliminate a perceived threat, they might be creating an actual enemy. Chapter 4. Banishment and Disgrace. The Emperor's judgment fell like the blade of an executioner's sword, swift and final. Mei Lin was stripped of her titles, her property confiscated, and her presence banned from the Forbidden City for eternity. By the mercy of imperial clemency, her life was spared, but she was to be cast out beyond the walls of Beijing with nothing but the clothes on her back. "Let it be known throughout the realm," the emperor proclaimed, "that treachery will not be tolerated, regardless of beauty or past favor. The empire's security supersedes all personal considerations." The formal ceremony of disgrace followed ancient protocols designed to utterly destroy not just a person's status, but their very identity. Mei Lin's silk robes were replaced with rough hemp cloth, her elaborate hairstyle undone, and her hair loosely braided like a peasant woman's. The jade ornaments that had marked her rank were removed piece by piece, each one representing another step down from the heights of imperial favor to the depths of social exile. Palace servants who had once competed for her attention now participated in her humiliation, some with obvious satisfaction, others with the grim necessity of self-preservation. In the Forbidden City, loyalty was a luxury that few could afford when survival demanded the appearance of proper indignation at exposed treachery. As Mei Lin was escorted through the palace gates for the last time, she committed every detail to memory: the guard stations that had failed to protect her, the courtyard where she had once walked in silk and confidence, the faces of those who had engineered her downfall. She understood now that her real education in the ways of power was just beginning. The road beyond the palace walls stretched into uncertainty, but Mei Lin felt something she had never experienced during her years of luxury and imprisonment: the exhilarating terror of absolute freedom. She had lost everything that defined her previous existence, but she had gained something potentially more valuable: the knowledge of how the game was truly played, and the determination to master it. Behind her, the forbidden city receded into the distance, its golden roofs and red walls growing smaller until they seemed like toys from a childhood she could barely remember. Ahead lay a world she had never known, populated by people who owed no allegiance to anyone but themselves. It was in this world that the former imperial consort Mei Lin would die, and something far more dangerous would be born. Chapter 5. Among the common people. The village of Longmen sat in a valley 50 miles south of Beijing, its muddy streets and thatched roof houses a stark contrast to the marble pavilions and silk tapestries of the Forbidden City. For someone who had spent 2 years breathing perfumed air and walking on polished floors, the reality of common life struck with the force of a physical blow. Mei Lin arrived with nothing but her hemp clothing and a determination to survive that surprised even herself. The villagers looked upon her with suspicion. Her too pale skin, her soft hands, and her refined speech marked her as someone who didn't belong among those who worked the earth for their daily bread. "Another fallen woman from the capital," whispered Old Mother Chen, the village's unofficial leader, whose word carried more weight than any official appointment. "Pretty enough, but look at those hands. Never done an honest day's work in her life." Mei Lin endured their scrutiny in silence, understanding that her survival depended on proving her worth through actions rather than words. She took shelter in an abandoned hut at the village's edge, its crumbling walls and leaking roof offering protection barely superior to sleeping in the open fields. Her first lesson in peasant survival came from Wang Xiaoli, a widow of 40 whose husband had died in the emperor's wars and whose children had grown old enough to work the family plot. Xiaoli was practical where others were suspicious, recognizing that an extra pair of hands could benefit everyone regardless of their origin. "Can you work?" Xiaoli asked bluntly during their first conversation. "Really work, with your hands and your back, until your muscles scream and your bones ache? I can learn," Mei Lin replied, and her willingness to acknowledge ignorance rather than pretend to capabilities she didn't possess earned her first small measure of acceptance. The work was backbreaking, weeding rice paddies under the brutal summer sun, hauling water from wells that seemed bottomless, mending tools with hands that blistered and bled before developing the calluses that marked honest labor. But with each day of physical exhaustion came a growing understanding of the empire's true foundation. Not the ceremonies and protocols of the Forbidden City, but the sweat and sacrifice of millions who had never seen the emperor's face. At night, when the village gathered around cooking fires to share simple meals of rice and vegetables, Mei Lin listened to conversations that revealed truths no court minister would ever dare speak aloud. The people suffered under taxation that left them barely enough to survive, while their sons were conscripted for wars they didn't understand against enemies they had never seen. "The emperor sits in his golden palace," complained Zhang Wei, a farmer whose eldest son had been taken for military service, "while we send our children to die for his glory. What does he know of the price we pay for his power?" Such words would have been unthinkable in the Forbidden City, where even thinking criticism of the emperor was considered treasonous. But here, among people who had nothing left to lose, honesty flourished like weeds in abandoned fields. Chapter 6. The teacher emerges. As autumn arrived and Mei Lin's hands grew strong from labor, she began to reveal skills that had been hidden beneath her peasant disguise. Her ability to read and write, gifts taken for granted in the palace but rare treasures in rural villages, made her invaluable to people struggling with tax assessments, legal documents, and correspondence with relatives in distant places. "The tax collector says we owe 30 taels of silver," Farmer Li said one evening, bringing an official document to the communal fire where Mei Lin sat mending clothes. "But the writing is too complex for us to understand exactly what he claims we owe it for." Mei Lin examined the document by firelight, her educated eye quickly identifying the bureaucratic language that disguised what amounted to legalized theft. The assessment included penalties for imaginary violations, fees for services never provided, and surcharges that had no basis in imperial law. "This assessment is fraudulent," she announced, causing a stir among the gathered villagers. "According to imperial decree, your tax burden should be no more than 15 taels, and several of these charges have no legal foundation." Her words sparked a mixture of hope and terror among the listeners. Hope that they might be freed from crushing financial burdens. terror at the prospect of challenging official authority with nothing but a former concubine's interpretation of imperial law. "Even if you're right," old Mother Chen said slowly, "what can we do? The tax collector has soldiers to enforce his demands, and we have nothing but farming tools and angry words." It was then that Mei Lin first articulated the philosophy that would eventually reshape the empire. Power belongs to those who understand how to use it, not to those who inherited it. The tax collector's strength comes from your belief that he cannot be challenged. Change that belief, and his power dissolves like mist in the morning sun. Over the following weeks, Mei Lin organized the villagers into a collective that could challenge official corruption through legal means. She taught them to document every interaction with government representatives, to demand written justification for every tax and fee, and to appeal fraudulent assessments through proper bureaucratic channels. The strategy worked with surprising effectiveness. When tax collectors discovered that their victims could read their documents and knew their rights, the opportunities for casual theft diminished dramatically. Word of Longmen's resistance spread to neighboring villages, and soon Mei Lin found herself teaching her methods to farmers from across the region. But success brought attention, and attention brought danger. The corrupt officials who had been profiting from peasant ignorance began to investigate the source of this inconvenient knowledge. Chapter 7. The Underground Network. By winter, Mei Lin had become the center of an informal network that stretched across 3 provinces, connecting villages that had never communicated with each other before her arrival. Her system of legal resistance had evolved into something approaching organized rebellion, though she was careful never to challenge imperial authority directly. "We are not opposing the emperor," she explained to gatherings of farmers and artisans who traveled miles to hear her speak. "We are supporting his true intentions by ensuring that his laws are properly enforced and his commands faithfully executed. Corruption is the real enemy of imperial authority." The distinction was crucial, allowing her followers to see themselves as loyal subjects rather than rebels. This framing also made it difficult for local officials to justify harsh measures against villages that claimed to be supporting imperial law rather than opposing it. Mei Lin established a communication system using traveling merchants, wandering monks, and seasonal workers to carry messages between communities. Each village appointed educated members to serve as legal advocates, armed with knowledge of imperial statutes and bureaucratic procedures that could frustrate corrupt officials. The network's first major success came when they exposed a grain procurement scheme that had been starving entire districts while enriching provincial administrators. By coordinating evidence from dozens of villages and presenting it through proper legal channels, they forced the dismissal of 3 corrupt magistrates and the restoration of thousands of stolen bushels of rice. But Mei Lin understood that her growing influence made her a target for those whose profits she threatened. She began to move frequently between villages, never staying in one place long enough for enemies to organize against her. She also started training lieutenants who could continue her work if she were captured or killed. One of her most trusted allies was Zhang Ming, a former merchant whose family had been ruined by official extortion. Zhang possessed the organizational skills of a successful businessman, combined with the moral fury of someone who had lost everything to corruption. "Teacher Mei," he said during one of their clandestine meetings, using the title by which she had become known throughout the network, "we have intelligence that the provincial governor is planning to move against you. Perhaps it's time to consider more direct methods of resistance." Mei Lin studied the map spread between them, marked with the locations of allied villages and hostile officials. The network she had built was powerful, but it remained vulnerable to coordinated government action. The moment was approaching when she would have to choose between retreat and escalation. Not yet, she decided. Direct violence would justify the kind of imperial response that could destroy everything we've built. But prepare the villages for the possibility that legal resistance may not be enough. Chapter 8. The Provincial Challenge. Governor Chen Bangyan was a man who had built his career on the systematic exploitation of those under his authority, transforming provincial administration into a machine for extracting wealth from peasants and funneling it into his own coffers. The emergence of organized resistance in his territory represented not just a threat to his profits, but a challenge to the fundamental system that had made his corruption possible. His response was swift and brutal. Imperial troops were dispatched to arrest seditious elements throughout the affected provinces. with orders to make examples that would discourage further resistance. Villages that had participated in Mei Lin's network found themselves occupied by soldiers who treated legal advocacy as treason. The crackdown began with the arrest of Jiang Ming, who was captured while coordinating relief efforts for villages devastated by both natural floods and official theft. His trial was a mockery of justice, conducted without legal representation, and based on evidence that would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so deadly. Mei Lin watched the proceedings from concealment, her heart burning with rage at the injustice, but her mind calculating the possibilities for response. Jiang Ming was to be executed as an example to others who might consider challenging official authority. His death intended to shatter the network of resistance before it could evolve into genuine rebellion. But the governor had miscalculated the effect of martyrdom on people who had already lost everything. Jiang Ming's execution, conducted in the main square of the provincial capital, while hundreds of villagers were forced to watch, created a symbol that proved more powerful than any living leader. "They can kill us one by one," Mei Lin addressed a secret gathering of network leaders the night after Jiang Ming's death. "But they cannot kill the idea that justice is possible. Jiang Ming died because he believed that farmers deserve to eat the grain they grow, that families deserve to keep enough of their harvest to survive winter, that laws should protect the innocent rather than enrich the corrupt." The assembled leaders, men and women, whose weathered faces reflected lifetimes of hardship, listened with the intensity of people who understood they were participating in something that would determine the fate of their children and grandchildren. "Governor Chen believes that fear will restore his system of theft and oppression," Mei Lin continued. "We will prove him wrong. We will show him that justice is not a privilege granted by corrupt officials, but a right that free people claim for themselves." The meeting concluded with a decision that would transform legal resistance into armed rebellion. The network would no longer simply document corruption and appeal to higher authorities. They would begin to actively prevent the enforcement of illegal taxes and fraudulent seizures, using force if necessary to protect their communities. Chapter 9. The Rebel Leader. The transformation from Teacher Mei to General Mei occurred gradually, then suddenly, as the network's passive resistance evolved into active rebellion. What began as village self-defense forces protecting against illegal taxation became an army capable of challenging provincial authority directly. Mei Lin discovered that her years in the Forbidden City had provided unexpected preparation for military leadership. The palace's intricate politics had taught her to manage competing personalities and conflicting interests, skills that proved invaluable when coordinating diverse groups of farmers, merchants, and disillusioned soldiers who had joined her cause. Her first major military victory came when Governor Chen sent 1,000 troops to forcibly collect back taxes from a cluster of villages that had declared their independence from his authority. Mei Lin's forces, numbering only 300 but fighting on familiar terrain with desperate motivation, destroyed the government force in a series of ambushes that demonstrated sophisticated tactical planning. "You fight like someone trained in military science," observed Liu Danyu, a former imperial officer who had defected to join the rebellion after witnessing too many atrocities committed against civilians. "Where did a palace concubine learn strategy?" "From listening to conversations I wasn't supposed to hear," Mei Lin replied with a smile that held secrets she wasn't ready to share. "Amazing how much you can learn about warfare by paying attention when generals think you're just decorative." But her real military education came from necessity and natural aptitude. She understood that conventional armies depended on supply lines, communication networks, and predictable tactics that could be disrupted by unconventional opponents. Her forces specialized in mobility and surprise, appearing where enemies least expected them, and vanishing before superior numbers could be brought to bear. More importantly, she recognized that military victory was meaningless without popular support. Every action taken by her army was designed to demonstrate that the rebellion served the people's interests rather than her personal ambitions. Captured tax revenues were returned to the villages from which they had been stolen. Prisoners were treated humanely and released if they swore oaths not to serve corrupt officials. Within 6 months, Mei Lin controlled territory encompassing over 1 million people, administered through a network of village councils that handled local governance while coordinating with regional commanders for mutual defense. It was a system that combined the efficiency of centralized military command with the responsiveness of local democratic participation. News of the rebellion's success spread throughout the empire, inspiring similar uprisings in other provinces while alarming imperial authorities who recognized the threat to their entire system of governance. Chapter 10. Imperial Recognition. The memorial that reached Emperor Chongzhen's court described a rebellion unlike any the Ming Dynasty had previously faced. Unlike the bandit armies and peasant uprisings that periodically plagued the empire, this insurgency demonstrated sophisticated organization, clear political objectives, and popular support that extended far beyond its military capabilities. The rebel leader calls herself Mei Lin, reported General Wu Sangui, the same military commander who had witnessed her disgrace in the Hall of Supreme Harmony 3 years earlier. She claims to rule in the emperor's name, enforcing imperial law against corrupt officials who have betrayed their oaths of service. The emperor listened to these reports with growing unease, not just because of the military threat they represented, but because of the political sophistication they revealed. A rebellion that claimed to serve imperial interests while challenging imperial authority was far more dangerous than simple banditry. "What are her demands?" the emperor asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Complete reform of provincial administration, removal of corrupt officials, restoration of stolen property to the affected populations, and formal recognition of village councils as legitimate representatives of local authority." Grand Secretary Zhou's voice carried grudging respect for the rebellion's political acumen. "She's essentially demanding that we govern according to our own laws." The irony was not lost on anyone present. Mei Lin's rebellion represented a more faithful implementation of Confucian principles than the empire's actual administration had achieved in decades. Her demands could be satisfied without any change to imperial law, requiring only that existing statutes be honestly enforced. "And if we refuse her demands?" the emperor inquired. "Then we face a civil war against an enemy who claims moral authority equal to our own," General Wu replied grimly. Her forces are outnumbered but highly motivated, fighting on favorable terrain with popular support. Military victory would require resources we can barely afford, especially with barbarian threats on our northern borders. The strategic situation forced a consideration of options that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The empire could negotiate with the rebellion, acknowledging the legitimacy of its grievances while attempting to co-opt its leadership. Or it could commit to the total military effort required to crush organized resistance, accepting the costs in blood and treasure that such a campaign would demand. "There is another possibility," Minister Liu suggested carefully. "We could invite the rebel leader to court for negotiations. If she truly serves the emperor's interests as she claims, then she should be willing to discuss peaceful resolution of these conflicts." It was a proposal that carried enormous risks for both sides, but it also offered opportunities that pure military confrontation could never provide. Chapter 11. The Summons Home. The imperial invitation reached Mei Lin through intermediaries who approached her camp under flags of truce, their message sealed with the emperor's personal seal and written in the formal language of diplomatic correspondence. She was invited to Beijing for negotiations aimed at resolving the misunderstandings that have led to unnecessary conflict between loyal subjects and imperial authority. The invitation was both an opportunity and a potential trap. Accepting would place her within reach of enemies who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy her through fabricated evidence and false accusations. Refusing might be interpreted as proof that her rebellion served personal ambition rather than principled opposition to corruption. "It's obviously a trap," declared Liu Danyu, her most trusted military advisor. "They failed to destroy you through their legal system, failed to defeat you through military force, and now they hope to eliminate you through treachery, disguised as diplomacy." Mei Lin studied the invitation while her senior commanders debated the merits of various responses. The summons represented recognition of her importance, an acknowledgement that the former concubine who had been cast out in disgrace had become powerful enough to demand imperial attention. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but it's also an opportunity to present our case directly to the emperor. If he truly believes in the principles of good governance that justify his rule, then hearing the truth about provincial corruption might persuade him to support genuine reform." Her decision to accept the invitation was controversial among her followers, many of whom believed that trusting imperial promises was naive at best and suicidal at worst. But Mei Lin understood that military victory alone could never achieve the systematic changes necessary to prevent future corruption. She would travel to Beijing with a small escort, carrying documentation of official abuses and proposals for administrative reform that addressed the root causes of rebellion rather than merely its symptoms. But she would also carry hidden weapons and maintain communication with her army, prepared to fight her way out of the capital if negotiations proved to be merely an elaborate execution ceremony. The journey to Beijing took her through territory she had not seen since her exile, landscapes that seemed both familiar and strange after 3 years of transformation. Villages that had once cowered under official oppression now sent representatives to wish her success, their faces reflecting hope that justice might finally be possible. As the walls of the Forbidden City came into view, Mei Lin felt the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. She was returning not as the broken concubine who had been cast out in disgrace, but as the leader of a movement that had challenged the empire's fundamental assumptions about power and legitimacy. Chapter 12. The Empress Who Ruled Without Fear. The throne room where Mei Lin had once been accused of treason now hosted her return as an equal negotiator, her modest traveling clothes contrasting sharply with the silk and gold splendor of imperial ceremony. Emperor Chongzhen, now visibly aged by years of crisis and defeat, regarded her with a mixture of recognition, wariness, and grudging respect. "We meet again under circumstances neither of us could have anticipated," the emperor said, his voice carrying none of the imperial distance that had marked their previous encounter. "You have traveled far from the woman who once graced our palace." "Your Majesty honors me with his recognition," Mei Lin replied, her bow precisely calculated to show respect without submission. "I have indeed traveled far, and the journey has taught me much about the empire's true condition." The negotiations that followed spanned 3 days and nights, with Mei Lin presenting evidence of systematic corruption that reached into every level of provincial administration. Her documentation was overwhelming: forged tax assessments, stolen grain shipments, fraudulent legal proceedings, and official violence against civilians who dared to resist theft disguised as legitimate government action. But more powerful than her evidence was her proposal for reform. She had not come to Beijing seeking personal revenge against those who had wronged her, but to advocate for systemic changes that would prevent future corruption. Her recommendations included regular audits of provincial finances, legal protections for citizens who reported official misconduct, and formal recognition of village councils as legitimate partners in local governance. "You speak like an empress," observed Grand Secretary Zhou during one heated exchange. "Perhaps that is what you have always intended to become." Mei Lin's response was swift and pointed. "I speak like someone who has seen the empire from both its heights and its depths, who understands that true strength comes from justice rather than force, and who believes that the emperor's authority is enhanced when his subjects prosper rather than suffer." By the 3rd day, it had become clear that traditional approaches to the rebellion would fail to address the underlying issues that had created it. Military victory might scatter Mei Lin's forces, but it would not eliminate the conditions that had made her movement possible. Only genuine reform could provide lasting stability. The agreement they reached was unprecedented in imperial history. Mei Lin would be appointed as provincial governor, with special authority to implement administrative reforms throughout the affected territories. Her rebel army would be incorporated into the imperial forces as a specialized unit, responsible for combating corruption and protecting civilian populations. Most remarkably, she would hold the title of imperial consort of the 1st rank, a position that placed her among the most powerful women in the empire, while providing legal protection against future persecution. "You have won more than you demanded," the emperor observed as they concluded their negotiations. "How can we trust that success will not corrupt your principles, as it has corrupted so many others?" Mei Lin's smile carried the wisdom of someone who had lost everything and rebuilt it through her own efforts. "Your Majesty, corruption is the privilege of those who believe their power cannot be challenged. I have learned that all power is temporary, all positions are conditional, and all authority depends on the consent of those who are governed. That knowledge is the best protection against the arrogance that destroys dynasties." As she left the throne room, no longer as a disgraced concubine but as the woman who would reshape the empire's relationship with its people, Mei Lin reflected on the journey that had brought her from the depths of exile to the heights of unprecedented authority. She had become the empress who ruled without fear, not through inheritance or marriage, but through the radical act of serving justice rather than personal ambition. The forbidden city that had once cast her out now welcomed her return, but she brought with her the voices of millions who had never seen its walls, ensuring that imperial power would serve all subjects rather than merely those fortunate enough to live within its golden embrace.